Welcome to Pushback. I'm Aaron Maté. Anticipation is high for the upcoming testimony of Special Counsel Robert Mueller. Now, Mueller has already said he will not go beyond the contents of his report, which found no conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russia. But that has not stopped those who promoted the Trump-Russia conspiracy theory, in Congress and in the media especially, from hoping that something explosive could emerge from Mueller's testimony. Well, for 2 years, what all of this Russiagate hype has overshadowed is something already explosive, the very real and very dangerous tensions that exist between the US and Russia, the world's top nuclear-armed powers. In fact, as my next guest argues, Russiagate has not just overshadowed US-Russia tensions, but made them even worse. Stephen F. Cohen is Professor Emeritus of Russian Studies at New York University and Princeton, a contributing editor at The Nation magazine, and the author of several books, including his latest, War with Russia, From Putin and Ukraine to Trump and Russiagate. Welcome to Pushback, Professor Cohen. Let me start by asking you what you're anticipating from Mueller's testimony and what questions from him would you like to see answered?
Well, I have a concern, and it already emerges from the Mueller printed report. In effect, stop and think about it. This thing we call Russiagate, this theory of a collusion or conspiracy between President Trump and the Kremlin, Mueller said that there was no such conspiracy. That is, he exonerated Trump, correct? More or less. But he indicted Russia. The Mueller report is full of all these anecdotal accounts of Russians running around the Trump campaign, and not only the Trump campaign. So Mueller indicts Russia for, quote, I don't know if he uses the word, I think he does, attacking our democracy in 2016. And I think that's going to be the centerpiece of Mueller's testimony to Congress, which will be played and amplified by the television networks. The problem here is it didn't happen. There was no Russian attack on America. There was no digital Pearl Harbor. But this has now become a thing, and a thing in the new Cold War relationship between Russia and the United States. So every day, I mean, literally every day, we hear some congressman like this Menendez from, Senator Menendez from New Jersey, wanting to enact new sanctions against Russia for its attack on us, on our democracy. This didn't happen. It's a myth. The Russians meddled, but both sides have been meddling in each other's politics since the Russian Revolution. So this thing has become bigger than Trump and bigger than Mueller. It's become geopolitical, and it's very bad.
To underscore your point, Professor Cohen, about the underwhelming nature of this alleged sweeping and systematic Russian interference campaign, the Mueller team was just rebuked by a federal judge for falsely implying a link between the Russian government and this troll farm that got indicted in February of 2018. In Mueller's report, he suggests that this troll farm with its social media clickbait was a part of a sweeping and systematic Russian government interference operation. The judge pointed out to the Mueller team that, in fact, Mueller has never asserted a link between that troll farm and the Russian government.
Well, as I understand it, the judge told Mueller he couldn't keep asserting that without proving it, the relationship to the government, and Mueller hadn't proved it. He just asserted. Look, hey, let's be realistic about these extraordinary and extraordinarily dangerous times in which we live. You, Aaron Maté, have done as much, arguably more, than anyone in the pages of The Nation and elsewhere to dismantle this false Russiagate narrative. But it lives on. It's like the legend of Liberty Vance. You remember that? Print the legend. The legend of the Russian attack is now a permanent feature of American politics. And this is new. If you accept my argument that I made on your broadcast long ago, I began arguing it in 2013, even before, that we're in a new Cold War with Russia, and that this new Cold War is more dangerous. One reason being that the epicenter of the Cold War is on Russia's borders in Ukraine, not in faraway Berlin. the way it was during the preceding Cold War. But since I began making that argument in about 2013, we now have a new escalatory, even more dangerous factor, and that's the phenomenon of Trump. We have a president, even though there's no evidence for this whatsoever, who is allegedly, or let me put it differently, who cannot be trusted to negotiate with the Russians. I'm not making this up. You remember what happened when he came back from his meeting with Putin in Helsinki. Was it July last year? Almost exactly a year ago. Am I remembering correctly, Aaron?
That's correct. A year ago.
Sorry, he did nothing in Helsinki with Putin that every president since Eisenhower had not done with a Soviet or Russian leader, hold a summit. It was just standardized summitry, and yet he came home and was accused of treason. So if the president of the United States is not permitted to negotiate down or away the dangers of the new Cold War, we are in a place we have never been since the beginning of the atomic era. To me, that's the central feature, and the silliness, reckless statements made by these members of Congress and by newspapers such as the New York Times and the Washington Post persist, even though Aaron Maté, you, and not only you, have dismantled this entire fiction of this collusion and this conspiracy. So I don't know what we do now.
Well, I want to ask you then about some of the key issues that all of this Russiagate hype has overshadowed when it comes to U.S.-Russia relations, because in this bid to substantiate this theory that Trump is doing the Kremlin's bidding, the media and political class has simply ignored all the countervailing developments in which Trump takes actions that escalate tensions with Russia. So right now we have the Trump administration rebuking Turkey for trying to purchase a Russian air defense system. We've just had very serious and important arms control talks in Geneva between the US and Russia that apparently went nowhere. So if you could talk to us about the state right now of US-Russia relations and how tensions between the two countries have been ignored by all the Russiagate hoopla.
All right, so one departing word about the Russiagate stuff. There's a big generation gap between you and me. And though you probably know this, I want to testify to the fact that in the 1970s and 80s, what was going on inside Russia with its policymakers and the dimensions of the American-Soviet and then Russian relationship were foremost in the news, covered by the New York Times, the Washington Post. Cable, I don't think quite existed yet, but it was on television and radio. So that was serious discussion with a lot of disputing about the most existential relationship that exists in the world today. That is the relationship between the two nuclear superpowers. That no longer exists. I mean, there is no real sustained reporting on politics in Russia today. The many different aspects of American-Russian relations. You mentioned Turkey's decision to buy the Russian anti-aircraft system, which almost every country wants. Evidently, we don't have anything like it. Evidently, we don't have anything that can thwart it. This is a history in itself worth discussing because, just to tell you where we are, we're on the cusp of an extraordinary nuclear arms race that derives from the American attempt to build missile defense, to gain a first strike nuclear capability against Russia. And then, just to make this story short, we withdrew from the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty in 2002, which meant the United States could deploy its anti-ballistic missile systems around Russia. And we did. And Russia responded by developing an entire new generation of nuclear weapons that we seem not to have, called hypersonic. And they can elude any missile defense system. So we no longer have a first strike capability. So now is the moment. It's absolutely essential for a whole new kind of nuclear arms negotiation. Because if not, these hypersonic weapons that the Russians have and we will get, and by the way, both sides are talking about putting them in space, outer space, which would be the weaponization of space, which would be a Rubicon once crossed, could never be uncrossed. I mean, we really are at turning points And what are we talking about in this country? What do we read about in the Times and the Russiagate, which is a false story? And yet what really is important, now the Russian media, I should say, is quite different. It finds Russiagate laughable, and there's a lot of joking about it in Russia, but the Russian media focuses on these issues I've mentioned. I think it's not that it might, I think it's already made the purchase. I mean, so far as you or I know, the Russian aircraft system, the S-300 or S-400, it's not clear which one they're going to sell them. I think shipment's already begun. And it's a member of NATO. What does this mean even? I mean, NATO was supposed to be we good guys against the bad guy Russians. Now a crucial member of NATO is buying its weapons from Russia. Well, I mean, let's stop and think about the economics of it. I mean, I'm not looking to criminalize weapons manufacturers, but the expansion of NATO has been a boondoggle for American weapons manufacturers, right? If you join NATO, a country, a state, a government, you have to have standardized weapons. Most of those weapons, I would judge about 75%, are built by American weapons manufacturers. They've made a fortune on NATO expansion. So what does it mean when Turkey, a NATO member, now decides it can buy better weapons from Russia? It has an economic impact, too. I don't give a hoot about the profit of the weapons makers in Washington, but they're raising a howl. They're losing. I mean, what if other NATO countries begin to buy weapons from Russia? Cheaper, better weapons than we make. It's all coming apart, Aaron. I mean, the world I grew up in and you inherited, the so-called American-led liberal world order, it's all come apart already. And something is emerging and that nobody quite knows what it is, but the Washington political media elite doesn't even want to think about it. They want to deny it or fight it. But the train's left the station.
Well, let's underscore this point, because in a normal political system, you'd think we have an opposition party that would be pushing back on reckless decisions by a president who escalates tensions with a nuclear armed power. But as you pointed out, under the Democrats, it's been the opposite. Instead of, or not just ignoring decisions that Trump makes that escalate tensions with Russia, as you pointed out, the Democrats are in fact encouraging them.
Yes, I mean, again, I mean, I don't want to sound like this old guy who keeps remembering how great things were back in the day, and they weren't great, but they were better in this sense, that in those days there were maybe 20 senators from both parties who were advocates of what we then called détente, that is, reducing the dangers of the Cold War and putting in the place of those dangers and conflicts important forms of cooperation, first of all, arms control. We look to the United States Senate today, and who do we see there that talks this kind of leadership language that we had back in the 70s and 80s? I see, and I mean, I don't want to slight anyone, but basically two people. Representative Tulsi Gabbard, who's running for the Democratic presidential nomination, and Senator Rand Paul from my own home state of Kentucky. These are not exactly titans of the Senate. They are outliers themselves. This also is new and dangerous. There's no opposition in this country, no formidable opposition that can fight this anti-Cold War battle, none whatsoever. And that brings us to Trump. I don't know why. I don't think for nefarious reasons of sex or money. Trump had it in his head. He said so when he was running for the presidency. I quote, "It would be great to cooperate with Russia." To which I said when I heard that, better than great. It would be essential. It's what we used to call détente. And look at the beating Trump has taken for having said that. Now, the curious thing about it is that to the extent he has any fixed beliefs that he's not willing to, that he's not ready to abandon for political profit, this seems to be one of them. He pushes on. He keeps saying it would be great to cooperate with Russia. And he's willing to meet with Putin, though he pays a heavy price here. So today, unlike in the past, the only leadership against this new Cold War, this new and more dangerous Cold War that we have, is President Donald Trump. So what do people such as myself and you do? I don't want to speak for you. But if I say we need to support Trump's détente policy with Russia, all hell breaks out. I'm denounced as being both pro-Putin and pro-Trump. What could be worse than that? And you can't get the conversation going. I mean, you've published enough critique, a lot of it empirical, of this whole narrative, but we can't move the dial. And all people do is say we're abetting Trump or Putin. It's unprecedented. I mean, there's never been anything like this in my lifetime. And I've gone, by the way, I have gone to Washington, and I know a few members of Congress, and talked to them, and privately said, you've got to speak out. And privately, they say, we agree with you. We don't disagree. And I said, good, I'll be looking forward to your speech on the floor of the Senate or the House, or your op-ed piece about this. Nothing, silence. A kind of chill, should I say fear? McCarthyist fear, some kind of chill has descended on Washington.
And to so much of our media class as well. And that's why this allegation that people who are skeptical of the Russiagate narrative are pro-Trump is so ironic. Because, I mean, first of all, there's a factual issue, just what are the available facts? And those facts should lead us to a conclusion that are divorced from partisan considerations. But then you take even a partisan consideration of whether or not Russiagate is good for Trump or not. I can't think of a bigger gift to Trump than to channel resistance to him into a conspiracy theory and put all of our hopes in Robert Mueller to validate it, thereby handing Trump a massive victory when, of course, as we've seen, Robert Mueller did not, finding no Trump-Russia conspiracy, thereby handing Trump another gift because now he can claim exoneration from a conspiracy theory that was so baseless to begin with.
Well, people say to people such as you and me, when we focus on aspects of Russiagate that aren't true, oh, you're dealing in conspiracy theories. You think, for example, Stephen Cohen thinks, for example, that the American intelligence agencies were instrumental in inventing this whole legend of Russiagate. And they say, oh, that's conspiracy theory. But what is bigger conspiracy theory than Russiagate itself? It's the grandest conspiracy that ever descended on American politics. And it isn't true. And somebody created it, and powerful political forces want to keep it going. Right. I don't know if you've ever given money to a Democratic candidate, but I gave a few bucks to one a number of years ago. And of course, party candidates share their donor list with other people. So I'm inundated with these appeals now about candidates I've never heard of across the country running for Congress. Alarming number of them are running against Russiagate. They are saying, I'm going to go to Washington and fight the evil Trump-Putin conspiracy in Washington. So Russiagate isn't dead. It has a life. And I worry that large segments of the Democratic Party intend to run on these Russiagate allegations, false allegations, in 2020. So the Democratic Party can be defeated for all I care if they do that. But think what that does to our relationship with Russia. You've got a new generation of nuclear weapons unfolding. You've got the danger of the militarization of space. You've got potential Cuban Missile crises from the Baltic Sea to Ukraine to Syria, where American-Russian fighting forces are eyeball to eyeball. It's just a question of time before they start accidentally killing each other. And what are we focusing on? I mean, what is the Democratic Party going to run on? Fictions. Now, the Republicans aren't a lot better, because what they want to do is they want to exonerate Trump and indict Russia. And to return to what we talked about at the beginning, Mueller gave them some material to do that. So just to give you a marginal but influential example, Hannity on his Fox News show says the Steele dossier was Russia disinformation. There's no evidence that Steele got anything in that dossier from inside Russia. I know pretty much, I think, where he got that information, and none of it was from a source actually inside Russia. So why say the Steele dossier was Russian disinformation? But that's part of this new Cold War that's exacerbating relations between the countries. And if a Democrat wins in 2020, it's going to have to be a very bold Democrat to be prepared to go forward and renew serious negotiations with Russia in this atmosphere.
So we'll wrap there and come back in part 2 and talk more about the investigation that is going on now. Not the Mueller investigation, which is over, but the investigation by Attorney General William Barr into the origins of the investigation that Robert Mueller inherited. My guest is Stephen F. Cohen, Professor Emeritus at New York University and Princeton, contributing editor at The Nation magazine, author of several books, including his latest, War with Russia, From Putin and Ukraine to Trump and Russiagate.